Hey everyone, hi running coach and Hoga athlete Sage Kande here with another Training Talk Tuesday, episode number 53, I believe. We're going to talk about polarized training, new buzzword term that's been thrown around a bit. Dr. Stephen Seiler, I believe. If you look back on some of the studies over a decade ago, there's talk of it, as well as in different training models, be it a 5-zone theory, 5-pace theory. There's a pyramidal training, pyramid scheme type of training, right? And at higher running, we have our free download, our pace intensity spectrum chart, where we're thinking of, we have 4 different colors on our chart, but, the zone training is kind of the thing that goes around. Now, polarized training, in layman's terms, it's kind of 80-20 training, right? Most mileage weeks, if you're running 100K a week, right? 80% of that is considered low intensity, conversational, aerobic base building pace, right? Under the thresholds, under the ventilatory threshold, but don't worry about those buzzwords. Under, we'll say 80% of max heart rate or 80% perceived exertion, more like 60 to 70% types of heart rate efforts or talking efforts, right? You're taking your easy days easy, and then sparsely, 20% of the mileage, 20K of 100K a week, is more in the thresholds to very high intensity training. So your hard days hard, easy days easy, hard days hard. It's kind of just repackaged that whole kind of idea. And if we look at a lot of things in life with 80-20, we go back to the, is it Paterno principle? What is it? I'll link what I'm doing there. An Italian guy came up with the distribution model, ironically, of, the 80-20. It's like 80% of the farmers owned 20% of the land in Italy, or the top 20% of people own 80% of all the wealth, right? So there's these interesting ratios with the whole idea of 80-20, and generally it is a good idea to have the vast majority of your training mileage as an endurance distance runner. We won't go into shorter sprint sports, or even triathlon and cycling. I think sometimes do a disservice to distance runners, because there are some different things if you're training for a major cycling race or an Ironman versus if you are mainly just running marathons, half marathons, 5K, 10K ultras. So building that aerobic base, obviously very important. And it's interesting to see these things get repackaged over the years, because if we go back to when I think training theory really changed back in like the 1960s with Arthur Lydiard, preaching that periodized training in terms of training changing over time, over a training plan, be it over several weeks, week-long blocks, or multiple week blocks, but several months, to how you structure your whole training year, or even multiple years, maybe thinking in Olympic cycles. You lay a foundation, you lay an aerobic base with a lot of lower intensity running, but you start sprinkling in the high intensity. It's like building a cake, right? The aerobic base training, the higher mileage stuff is like, building the cake layers and the flavors, and then the icing on the top is the harder interval sessions, be they VO2 max or short high intensity anaerobic sessions even. But then there's kind of the in-between layers, right, with the thresholds. And that's what we're going to mainly talk about, how that differs with the polarized training model, 80-20, take your easy days easy, hard days hard, versus what's already been talked about with 5-zone training, more of a pyramid type of scheme training, what we believe in at higher running, coming back to that Arthur Lydiard model, but also guys like Sebastian Coe, Peter Coe, his dad, the 5-pace theory model, based on, if you have your race pace, be it a 5K or a marathon, you're working at a couple notches slower and a couple notches faster than your race pace. And those paces, especially if you're training for a track or road event, are very predetermined, because if you want to crack 3 hours in the marathon, right, you got to get used to running 6:52 per mile pace. And if you can't do that, you can't do that. It doesn't really matter what your rate of perceived exertion is or what your heart rate is exactly, because you probably don't know your 100% max. What matters is that you can move your legs that fast for that long and not hit the wall, or get a muscle cramp, or go into glycogen depletion, or be breathing so hard that you start developing too much lactate and you can't clear it in time. So that's really the idea, and I think it does a disservice a bit to throw around these buzzwords, because it oversimplifies a lot of training models, while at the same time it overcomplicates things, as much as that sounds like a paradox. So let's break it down. So I think when Steven Seiler and a lot of these exercise science guys who do have a lot more credentials than me, obviously PhDs, got a lot of their support from some of these studies, but in my opinion, some of these studies are actually not very damning evidence, so to speak, or very conclusive. And the thing what I see with scientific studies, especially nowadays when people like to throw science around, science in your face, and I am a big science guy, is that you have to look at the controls to assess the validity of the study. Not just the n equals number, the sample size, but what kind of outside variables are going on. Like, what kind of, you can't control for all the variables. It's like that in nutrition studies as well. You're looking at athletes. Are they elite athletes? Are they semi-elite? Are they, more average people? Or are they more beginners who aren't in shape? So you're looking at these different cohorts. You're looking at these different sample sizes. You're breaking it down. The one study that got a lot of traction was over 10 years old. We'll pull up some of the screenshots here. I looked at it. I was training 10K runners. 10K runners with different models, looking at polarized training model versus not polarized, more traditional 5-pace theory, 5-zone theory model. And the interesting thing is if you look at the results after they go through these trainings, the results, both groups improved their 10K time substantially, but there was no statistical differences really that were worth noting between the two groups. So it wasn't really a very strong argument in my mind that this polarized training is really that much better, but at the same time, you're not controlling for all the variables, and there's a lot of the devil's in the details with the exact workouts, the exact timing, and how you structure that. And that's why with higher running and individual coaching, even our training plans, we like to go by velocity, pace, effort for the marathon road runners. Maybe heart rate, but heart rate is a sliding target. As we know, a lot of people don't know their max heart rate. There could be a lot of errors. And then rate of perceived exertion, of course, is very, very subjective depending on the person. So, you could say, take your easy days easy. Can you talk and run? Well, if you could talk a lot and run, it's probably fairly easy and you're not going over a threshold. But what does your lactate feel like? What does 4 millimoles of lactate feel like? A lot of people don't know that exactly. So it's very hard to control that. Another study I saw, and this was quoted in a Runner's World article, which I would not trust, certainly. Some are better than others, but it talked about polarized training, and they had groups of cyclists. Now, I'll admit, I don't know a ton about cycling. Cycling is quite different from running, and I think there's a lot of discrepancy there when you're comparing studies between triathletes, cyclists, and then runners, and then even swimmers maybe. You get into, there's a lot of conflict there because of the inherent difference in mechanics and how the muscles are used exactly. The heart and lungs don't know the difference, but one group was doing these high intensity 30-second intervals, 13 times 30 seconds hard, with only a 15-second recovery, and then they divided it into sets, so it equaled basically the amount of time the other group was doing, which was high intensity intervals for about 5 minutes. Now, the first problem with that is generally for doing VO2 max or even really critical velocity, high-end tempo intervals, 5 minutes is a pretty long time. A lot of times the target for VO2 max is more like 2 to 3 minute intervals. So if you're a runner, for a lot of people, that's like doing repeat 800 meters or repeat kilometers at the longest. As an elite, if you could run a 5-minute mile and do a bunch of mile repeats, then you're pretty elite, right? But that's kind of the highest end of the spectrum. 5 minutes, you can't quite get the intensity high enough. And we saw that in this study. Look at the wattage on the bikes. These guys were doing way less on the 5-minute interval compared to when they were doing these 30-second blasts, even with the short recovery. And the dynamics of the workout, the high intensity time zone portion versus the recovery portion versus how you divide that into sets and reps, in my mind, you have to look at the grand picture of things, not just the details of each interval, but the grand picture of how your blood lactate values, how your heart rate, how your lungs are working during the course of the workout, but also during repeated bouts of this workout stimulus over the weeks and weeks in the intervention period. I think it's a lot of half-assed people are drawing conclusions with high correlations, which is great. But if you're not controlling for all the variables in the data, it's not very conclusive evidence that polarized training is really that much better than a more traditional zone model of training, be it 5-pace zone by 5 zones, pyramidal training, the devil's in the details, exactly how you balance it. And so yes, the general rule is you need to do 80% of your mileage easy on most weeks, but that's going to change throughout the course of your training program, whether you're tapering or starting off or in the peak of training. And it also depends on exactly what event you're training for, whether you're trying to peak for a cross-country parkrun 5K or a track 5K, road 5K, or you're training for a marathon on the roads, because the systems that you're training, and this is the key takeaway, the systems that you're training are a bit different. The demands of a 5K are quite a bit different from the demands of a marathon. Yes, they're all distance races, they're all mainly aerobically based, but there's a bigger anaerobic component and a raw speed component in the 5K, VO2 max component, compared to the marathon, where you're talking about more like ultra marathons. There's a big glycogen fat utilization component, big dehydration and potential muscle damage component in the longer races. So I'll go back to some of my favorite coaches. Pete Fitzinger, advanced marathoning, shout out to Cornell. He's a Cornell grad, made a couple Olympic teams, but also an exercise science guy. His advanced marathon book, probably one of the best books out there, as well as advanced training for 5K, 10K runners, I think it's called. And then Jack Daniels, not the whiskey guy, always a great way to break down the models, and you even see like the pyramid models in his older editions of the book with easy. Then we got, threshold, call it zone 2, call it zone 3. And then, VO2 max, and then the anaerobic component. And that's what we've worked at more with higher running, is looking at these different systems and say, what am I training exactly? But also, what velocity am I going at? Because speed and efficiency at certain paces and speed usually does matter. Unless you're maybe an ultramarathon trail mountain runner, then you kind of have to throw the pace and speed out the window because of technicality of trails, steepness of hills, and things like that. So I think it does a disservice because people repackage these terms that are basically saying the same thing over and over, and it's the new buzzword of the decade or the new buzzword of the year, and it's really makes things overcomplicated for beginners that are trying to figure out exactly how to train. But at the same time, for advanced coaches and more advanced athletes, it kind of oversimplifies things because the details of each workout matter, the sequence of each workout matters, and it isn't one given workout or one hard long run or 1 2-week taper block even that defines the race performance. And if you want to perform well or try to reach more of your potential in actual race performances, you need a comprehensive plan that changes over time, that's periodized, but that also changes the types of workouts you're doing over time. And as Jack Daniels said, you don't want to be in no man's land, no zones. There's kind of a half-assed zone between easy and going into steady state, right? Some people, and this is the common mistake, I think, why Polarized Training caught on so much, is we say, hey, slow down on your easy days, right? People, we're too eager to improve. We want to push a little every day. They go out the door close to their marathon pace sometimes, especially someone who's running around 4 hours for the marathon and for the easy runs. But it's marathon race pace, you need to dial that back even on a lot of days. But then on the same token, on the flip side, if you're doing hard intervals at the track and you want to get close to VO2 max over 95% max heart rate, you got to really turn and burn. You got to be willing to hurt, and you got to be able to put in some really much faster gear changes than just this half-assed gray zone where it's kind of medium hard. So we're getting rid of the medium hard efforts. Again, at higher running, we do believe in doing a lot of the next zone up from easy is more up-tempo efforts, which for a lot of people is around marathon race pace. Then the next zone up after that, of course, tempo to true lactate threshold. You're talking about something right in between 10K to half marathon pace for most people. Call it critical velocity if it's 12K race pace, but you're doing long intervals like that. So if you're a 3-hour marathoner, or you want to crack 3 hours in the marathon, 6:52 per mile is your marathon race pace. True tempo might be 6:35 per mile pace, and you better believe that you need to be doing 3K or 5K repeats, 2 mile or 3 mile repeats at that pace with a short rest, like a 5-minute rest, and repeat that over and over, or you're not going to be able to hold a slightly slower pace for the whole marathon because you don't have that efficiency in terms of clearing lactate, but also in terms of the muscle strength in your legs, and you're stimulating all sorts of great aerobic adaptations even at that. Next level up, we look into saying, hey, we're getting into a VO2 max zone. We're over the lactate threshold. We've got an anaerobic component, so to speak, So this is high intensity HIIT training, high intensity intervals. Like I said, the sweet spot for VO2 max intervals, usually 2 to 3 minutes at a time. And again, these are the icing on the cake. In our training plans at Higher Running, we might only do these once every other week, and we're not going to do the same workout every week. Because one week it might be 6 times 800 meters at 5K pace. The next week we might build you up, or 10 days later, 12 days later, we might build you up to 6 times a kilometer at 5K pace. And we might keep the rest real short at 2 or 3 minutes, right? So that's more bread and butter VO2 max workouts. If you're doing fartleks, if you're doing timed intervals, if you're doing the surges, 30 seconds high intensity, 15-second float, you're changing a lot of dynamics. There's a lot of moving targets, a lot of variables there. Is it a good workout if it works your heart and lungs really high? Yes. Is it motivating because you could focus for 30 seconds at a time and bear that pain? Yes. So these things all generally do lead to good adaptations and not overtraining, as long as you're balancing it with a good aerobic base. You've worked up your volume, you've worked up your mileage progressively, you're not getting hurt, you're not getting sick, and mentally you're not losing it because you're not putting yourself in a lot of pain every day. Or even, sub-maximal effort every day. You don't want to exhaust your muscle fibers either. So I think that's why Polarized Training caught off. Again, this is kind of a rambling, more advanced training talk. I do realize that, but comment below with your training talk questions. I know there was one on recovery. I've done a lot of recovery routines over the years on this channel. You can check them out on on my playlist. Definitely a lot over the last 12 years. So again, hope you're doing well. Comment below though with future training talk topics, or if you'd like clarification on this training talk. I know I was rambling there quite a bit, but to break down some of the science. I love talking science. I love coaching runners of any surface, any distance. Again, check out our training plans and programs at higherrunning.com. We have our ultimate running course, how to learn how to coach yourself, as well as merch. We got some of the hats, Higher Running hats in the background, US shipping only. Thanks so much for your support. Thanks to Patreon supporters for really making this channel possible. Again, shout out to title sponsor Hoka, keeping the dream alive. Got some more updates and vlogs coming at you on the way. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at SageCandidate. Got a Facebook fan page as well for my athlete page. Thank you again. Hope you're doing well, and stay tuned for more VO2 Max Productions.